Snow whispered like breath against the broken window panes, soft and endless, the kind that buried fences and swallowed sound. Inside the leaning cabin, Edith Mayfield bent over a bucket of thawing snow, her hands red and trembling from the cold. Steam rose from the small iron kettle by the hearth, and the smell of ash and loneliness filled the room. Her belly, round and heavy beneath a patched gray dress, pressed against the table's edge as she reached for a cracked cup. The baby kicked once, reminding her she was not entirely alone, though sometimes she wished she were. Outside, the world was white and cruel. The path to town had vanished beneath the drifts, and even the crows had stopped calling. A month ago, she'd walked to the general store, hoping to trade a quilt for flour. The men had stared, whispering through their teeth. The sheriff's wife had drawn her shawl tighter and said, "She's the one. Pregnant and no husband. Brought shame to the Lord's land." Edith had walked back through the snow without a word, quilt still folded in her arms, heart split but face unbroken. Now, her voice was the only one that dared to speak here. "Hush, little one," she murmured to her belly as she stirred the kettle with a stick. "We'll make it through the winter, just you and me." The words fogged in the air like a prayer half believed. Her fingers brushed the wooden cradle beside the fire, still empty, still waiting. The wind howled through the cracks of the door. She pushed the chair against it and sat down, wrapping the old wedding shawl around her shoulders. It still smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. Her late husband had been a kind man once, before the fever took him. When he died, the town's sympathy had lasted exactly 3 days. Then came the looks, the pity turned to suspicion, the whispers that maybe the child wasn't his. No one asked, and she had no strength left to explain. The fire flickered low. She rose to feed it, her body slow and heavy. Then, from beyond the door, she heard the dull thud of hooves. Once. Twice. A pause. Then another, closer. The chair rattled against the frame. She froze, one hand on her chest. No one came here, not in this weather, not to a woman like her. The knock came low and steady. Not frantic. Not cruel. 3 taps that carried a strange patience. She hesitated, her mind chasing every danger it knew. Drifters, thieves, drunk men looking for something to break. She gripped the iron poker. When she cracked the door, a gust of snow rushed in with the shape of a man behind it. Tall, broad-shouldered, hair dark and wet against his face. His skin gleamed bronze beneath the flakes, and his breath came in clouds. He was shirtless beneath a fur-lined coat that hung open at the chest, the muscles of his arms marked by scars that told stories she couldn't read. A horse stood behind him, ribs showing through its wet hide. "Can I stay one night?" His voice was low, careful, carrying an accent she knew only from stories. Apache, maybe. Edith gripped the door tighter. "This ain't a boarding house," she said, though her voice wavered. "I'll stay by the fire. I have food." He opened his palm to show a strip of dried venison, snow melting in his hand. His eyes were not begging, just waiting. Calm as stone. The wind pushed between them, scattering her hair. She thought of the empty cradle, the silence that had filled her days. Then she stepped back and nodded once. "Just till morning." He entered without a sound. Snow melted onto the floorboards beneath his boots. He closed the door gently, almost reverently, and crouched by the fire as if the small flame were something sacred. When she offered him a blanket, he shook his head. "Keep for the child." They didn't speak for a long while. The crackle of wood filled the space where words might have lived. He laid his knife on the floor beside him, blade turned away. A gesture of peace, she realized. He looked around the cabin, not in judgment but in quiet observation, and said, "You live here alone?" Her chin lifted. "I have enough." He nodded once. "Enough is good." As the night thickened, the storm outside grew fierce, pressing against the cabin like a living thing. He rose to check the door, then knelt and wedged it with a log so it wouldn't rattle. When the wind threatened the chimney, he adjusted the stones until the smoke flowed clean. Every motion was wordless help, the kind that embarrassed her and comforted her at once. She poured him a little broth from the kettle, and he accepted it with a small bow. Steam clouded between them. His eyes caught the light, dark, steady, almost gentle. She noticed then the faint tremor in his hands. "How long since you ate?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "2 days. Maybe 3. I stop counting when snow comes." She pushed the bowl toward him. "Then count again tonight." They shared the meal in silence. Outside, wolves howled from the ridge, and the wind carried their voices through the chimney. He glanced toward the window once, but did not move for his weapon. Instead, he said softly, "They hunt what is weak." Her fingers tightened on the cup. "Then they'll find plenty here." He looked at her then, really looked, and said, "You are still standing. That is not weak." She turned away, pretending to tend the fire, but her throat ached. It had been so long since anyone spoke to her without scorn or pity. Later, when she lay on the cot, she watched him through half-closed eyes. He sat cross-legged by the fire, eyes closed, lips moving silently. The language he whispered was unfamiliar, musical and low, a sound that seemed older than the storm. His profile was cut from bronze and shadow, his hair gleaming in the firelight. She thought, absurdly, of old saints painted on chapel walls. Sleep came slow. She dreamed of open plains and a heartbeat beside hers, deep and steady. When she woke, the fire had burned low, and he was gone from sight. Panic rose sharp until she saw him outside through the frosted window, splitting logs beneath the faint gray dawn. He worked with quiet strength, bare arms gleaming with frost. Each swing of the axe fell like the beat of a drum. She stepped outside, the cold biting her lungs. "You didn't have to," she said. He shrugged. "Fire keeps the child warm. That is reason." The words landed like something heavy and kind. She wanted to thank him, but the air between them felt fragile, as if gratitude might break it. Instead, she said, "There's bread." He smiled, a small curve that softened his face. "Then we both eat." They stood together by the doorway, steam rising from their breath. For a moment, the world felt almost gentle. But in the distance, across the frozen field, she saw a flicker of movement, riders. 2 of them, small against the whiteness, moving slow but sure toward the woods. Her stomach tightened. The sheriff's patrol often rode this way, checking for trespassers, for strangers that didn't belong. If they saw the man beside her, the bare chest, the dark skin, the Apache hair, they would not ask questions first. She turned quickly. "You should go before they see you." He followed her gaze, then shook his head. "Storm's not done. Horse won't make it." Her breath came short. She imagined the sheriff's smirk, the townsfolk's whispers, the gossip that would bloom like rot if they saw an Indian leaving her cabin. Her pulse thudded. "If they come they'll think—" She stopped, unable to finish. He looked at her with calm eyes. "Let them think. You gave me fire. That is all truth needs." But truth had never saved her before. She stepped back inside, pressed her hand to her belly and whispered, "Lord, don't let them come." The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of hooves fading away. For now they were safe. She sank to the floor, tears hot against her cheeks, her breath shaking with relief. When she looked up, he was still at the doorway, snow drifting through the open crack, his gaze soft but unreadable. Then, in a voice that seemed almost reverent, he said, "I'll stay till morning." And though she wanted to say no, her heart betrayed her. The words came quiet, fragile as candlelight. "Then stay, till morning." Outside, the storm gathered again, but inside, the air felt different, less empty, less cruel. She turned toward the fire, feeling its warmth crawl slowly back into her bones. For the first time in many months, Edith Mayfield was not alone in the snow. Morning crept through the cabin like a pale ghost, brushing its fingers across the frost-rimmed window. Edith stirred awake to the sound of an axe biting wood. For a moment she thought it was her husband, that brief, half-dreamed mercy before memory returned. Then she saw the tall figure through the warped glass, shoulders gleaming with sweat despite the cold. Each swing clean, measured, deliberate. The stranger had not left. She sat up slowly, pulling her shawl tight around her. The cradle beside the hearth stood empty still, waiting for the child that had not yet arrived, but already dictated her every breath. She listened to the rhythm outside, the thud, the pause, the exhale, and found herself breathing with it. When the door opened, he stepped in carrying 2 armfuls of split wood. Snow fell from his hair onto the floorboards. He set the logs down without a word and nodded once in greeting. "Fire was hungry," he said, voice low and rough. Her eyes followed the steam rising from his skin. "So are you." She reached for the small loaf she had baked the night before, cut it in half, and offered him a piece. He hesitated, then took it with both hands, as though it were something sacred. They ate in silence. Outside, the storm's rage had gentled to a steady fall, flakes drifting like feathers. The quiet between them was not empty. It had weight, like the hush before a prayer. She watched him glance around the cabin, the cracked beams, the patched roof, the empty shelves, and she felt her pride stir, foolish and human. "It's small," she said, "but it keeps out most of the cold." He looked up, chewing slowly. "Cold only wins if you stop moving." His eyes were dark and steady, carrying both weariness and something softer. Recognition, maybe. She realized she had not looked anyone in the eyes for months. When the meal was done, he went outside again, and she followed him to the doorway. The snow was knee-deep, glittering under a fragile sun. He had begun mending the broken fence using branches he'd cut himself. She almost protested. Her voice rose, then caught in her throat. No one had done a kindness for her since before the whispers began. "You don't need to," she said quietly. "I do," he replied. "A fence keeps what lives from wandering into death." She wanted to ask who he meant, her or the horse, but he had already turned back to work. His movements were spare, efficient, like someone who had learned to save his strength. Hours passed that way. When she brought him coffee, he waited until she drank first before lifting his cup. A small thing, but it made her throat tighten. She wondered how many winters he had survived by expecting poison from strangers. By afternoon, the fence stood straight again, a fragile skeleton against the white field. He leaned on his axe, breathing slow. "Good wood," he murmured. "Strong roots nearby." Edith brushed snow from her sleeves. "This land don't forgive easy," she said. He looked toward the distant hills. "No land does. Only people do." The words hung between them, heavy with meanings neither dared name. Inside, as dusk fell, she heated broth for supper. The firelight painted her face in gold and shadow. He sat near the hearth, sharpening his knife, though his movements were slow, almost absent-minded. She caught herself studying the scars that climbed his forearms, thin white lines crossing old burns. "Were you in the war?" she asked softly. He nodded once. "Many. Before peace. Before soldiers forgot why they fight." "Who did you lose?" He looked into the fire instead of her. "All of them." She felt her breath tremble. "I lost one too." He didn't ask who. Instead, he reached for a log and fed it to the flames. The crackle filled the silence like an answer neither of them needed spoken. Later, as wind brushed against the shutters, he told her, haltingly in fragments, about the river valley where his tribe once lived, where his mother sang to the dawn. He spoke of soldiers, smallpox, fire. His words were simple, but the pauses between them carried more pain than any wound. When he fell silent, she whispered, "And you came north?" "I walk where winter forgets names." Something inside her shifted, slow as thawing ice. "Then you'll forget mine too." He looked at her then, and the faintest smile touched his lips. "Names are not what stay." The wind howled again, shaking the door. She rose to check the latch, and he followed, sensing her unease. Hoofbeats sounded faintly through the snow, distant but unmistakable. Her pulse jumped. "The sheriff's riders," she breathed. "They come this way sometimes, looking for anyone like you." He moved to the window, eyes narrowing. "How far?" "Too close." She turned, panic rising. "They'll see smoke." He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulled a heavy hide from his pack, and threw it over the fire. Smoke died to a whisper. Darkness filled the cabin, thick and quick. He crouched near the back wall, every muscle taut. "If they knock," he said, "you answer." A minute stretched into a lifetime. Then came the sound. 2 horses stopping outside, men's voices muffled by snow. Mayfield's place, one said. Still standing, somehow. She's stubborn, that one, the other replied. Can't save everyone from their own sin. Edith's throat burned. The knock rattled the door. She opened it a sliver. The sheriff's deputy leaned in, face red from cold. You alone, Miss Mayfield? She nodded, forcing her voice steady. Who else would come here? He sniffed, eyes sliding over the dim room. We heard an Indian was seen near the ridge. You best keep your doors barred. They get desperate in weather like this. Her heart pounded so loud she feared they'd hear it. I will, she said softly. Good night. The man tipped his hat and rode off into the swirling white. She shut the door, hands trembling. For a long moment she could only stand there, breathing hard, listening to the receding hooves. Then she turned. The stranger was still crouched, knife drawn, eyes calm. Slowly, he sheathed it and rose. You lied, he said quietly. I had to. He studied her face, the fear still shining there. Then, with a gentleness that surprised her, he said, You didn't lie. You protected. Something broke inside her then, a tension wound too tight. She sank into the chair by the fire, tears spilling silently. He hesitated, then knelt beside her. His hand found hers, rough and warm. He didn't speak, didn't comfort. He simply stayed. The silence grew thick again, but it was no longer empty. It was shared, alive. When she finally lifted her gaze, she saw the faintest trace of exhaustion in his eyes, the same kind she saw each morning in her own reflection. Two strangers, bruised differently by the same world. You can go when the storm clears, she whispered. It should be soon. He shook his head. Storm's only half of it. She didn't ask what he meant. The fire revived under his careful hand, shadows climbing the walls. The snow outside pressed harder against the windows, the world shrinking to this one flickering room. When she closed her eyes, she thought she heard him praying again in that low foreign tongue. But maybe it was only the wind, soft, persistent, like a promise neither of them dared to name. The storm returned like a living thing, its howl crawling down the chimney, shaking the windows, scattering flakes through every crack in the wood. By nightfall, the world outside the cabin had turned into white chaos, erasing every trace of path and fence and mercy. Edith moved slowly, one hand on her swollen belly, the other steadying herself against the wall. The firelight threw her shadow across the floor, tall and trembling. Tejo had been gone since noon, gathering what he could from the ravine. She'd begged him not to go, but he'd only said, Storm's better met when you know what's coming. Now, each gust of wind felt like a hand dragging him farther away. When the latch finally lifted and the door burst open, she nearly cried out. He stepped in, breath heavy, hair crusted with ice, his shoulders glistening where snow had melted and refrozen. You shouldn't have gone, she said, voice breaking between anger and relief. I found the mare. She'd fallen, he said, pulling off his coat. Broken leg. I ended it. Her throat tightened. You did right. He nodded once, then crouched near the fire, rubbing his hands together. He looked older in the orange glow, the lines near his eyes carved deep. He had been beautiful when she first saw him, she realized. Not in the way of clean men from town, but like something carved by weather itself. The kind of beauty that survives ruin. The wind howled louder, slamming against the cabin like a beast denied entry. This storm won't pass quick, he murmured. It has hunger. Hunger? She echoed. He glanced at her, half smiling. Storms, like people, eat what's weak. She turned her face away, though her pulse trembled. Then we'll have to starve it. He didn't answer. He only rose, checking the boards, tightening the rope around the door. She watched him move with deliberate care, his silence heavy with thought. For a moment, she wished he would talk, tell her something simple, something ordinary. But Tejo never spoke to fill space. Every word he gave felt chosen from a lifetime of silence. When he finished, he came to stand near her. You are cold, he said. I'm always cold. He hesitated, then reached for the blanket draped over the chair. When his fingers brushed her shoulder, she flinched, Not from fear but from the shock of touch itself. She hadn't been touched since her husband's funeral. He felt it too. His hand paused, then moved away slowly, leaving only warmth behind. Outside, thunder rolled like a drumbeat. The walls creaked. Snow dust fell from the rafters. He said softly, "The storm is changing." "What do you mean?" "It's angry." A sound cut through the wind, a faint rhythmic pounding. Not the storm. Hooves. Many of them. Edith stiffened. He turned toward the window, eyes narrowing. Through the swirling white, faint lanterns glowed. 5, maybe 6, moving in a line. "Riders," she whispered. "The sheriff." He didn't answer, but his hand went to the knife on his belt. "They can't find you here," she said, her voice trembling. "If they see you." "I know." Her heart raced as he stepped toward the back door, where the drifts reached waist height. "They'll follow your tracks," she hissed. He paused. "Then I'll lead them away." "No." Her cry startled even herself. She took a step toward him, one hand gripping the table for balance. "You won't make it in that cold." He met her eyes, calm as ever. "Better me than you." She shook her head, tears pricking. "I've lived with their judgment. You haven't. They'll hang you without a word." He watched her for a long moment, snow hissing through the gaps in the door. Then, with a small exhale, he said, "You have courage, even when afraid." "That's not courage," she whispered. "That's desperation." He smiled faintly. "Same thing." The riders grew louder. Lantern light flickered across the walls as they neared the cabin. She could hear Boone's voice, hard and familiar, shouting above the wind. "Search the place." She turned in panic. "They'll break the door." He moved toward the corner, crouching behind the woodpile. His stillness was terrifying, complete, like a deer hiding from the hunter. She threw a blanket over him and dragged the rocking chair in front. The effort sent a bolt of pain through her belly. A fist hammered on the door. "Edith Mayfield. You inside?" Her voice cracked as she answered. "Yes, Sheriff. What's the trouble?" The door opened before she could finish. Boone stepped in, his coat dusted white, his face red from drink and wind. "Evenin', ma'am." He glanced around the small room, his eyes pausing on the fire, the single cup on the table. "You been alone out here?" "Yes." Her hands twisted in her shawl. "We saw tracks. Looked fresh. Big man's stride." She forced a laugh that nearly broke. "A wolf, maybe. Or I walked to the creek earlier." Boone's smirk deepened. "You? In this weather?" "I needed water," she said quickly. "The child, he needs." Her words stumbled into silence. Boone's eyes dropped to her belly, then back to her face, sharp and cold. "Still not sayin' who the father is?" She said nothing. He stepped closer. "You oughta leave this place, Edith. Folks don't forget easy. They think sin brings storms like this." "Maybe storms come to wash sin away," she whispered. He stared at her for a long moment, then spat on the floorboards and turned to leave. "Suit yourself. But if I see that Indian again, I'll gut him before the Lord can blink." The door slammed behind him. The riders' hooves faded. The storm swallowed their sound. Edith stood still, chest heaving. Her knees gave, and she sank onto the floor, her hand pressed to her belly. A deep ache rolled through her body. Sharp, then sharper still. She gasped, realizing too late that it wasn't fear now but pain. Tejo was beside her in an instant, the blanket falling away. "What is it?" She looked up, eyes wide. "It's time." The next hour blurred into fragments. Firelight, sweat, thunder, breath. The wind screamed outside while he boiled water, tore strips of cloth, moved with a calm that steadied her when her own body betrayed her. She cried out once, gripping his arm hard enough to draw blood. He didn't flinch. "Breathe," he whispered. "Like river. Not like storm." The pain came again, and she did as he said, panting through it, her forehead slick with tears. Between contractions, she saw him, his face calm but his eyes burning, every muscle in his body drawn tight as if her pain were his own. "Why are you helping me?" She gasped. He met her gaze. Because someone helped my mother once. Another wave of pain struck, and she screamed, clutching his hand. He whispered in his own tongue, words like song, low and rhythmic, the sound of wind over stone. It carried her through the worst of it. At last, a small cry pierced the storm, a sharp, miraculous sound that silenced everything else. She looked down, sobbing with disbelief as he wrapped the tiny wriggling child in his coat. The firelight painted the newborn in gold and shadow. "It's a boy," Tejo said, his voice rough, breaking. Edith reached for him, tears spilling freely now. He's here. He is strong," Tejo said softly. "Like his mother." Outside, the wind began to fade. The world grew still. Snowlight seeped through the cracks, pale and new. Tejo knelt beside her, eyes wet, knife trembling as he cut the cord. She leaned back, weak, her breath shaking. The cabin smelled of life and smoke and blood. The baby whimpered once, then quieted in her arms. Tejo looked toward the window. Storms breaking. She smiled faintly, exhausted. Maybe it was waiting for him. He nodded, eyes distant. Maybe. For a long time they sat like that, two strangers, the fire between them, the newborn asleep in her arms while the snow outside turned from white to silver. Then, faintly, the sound of hooves returned, far off, echoing down the frozen valley. She looked toward the door, heart tightening. "They're not gone," she whispered. Tejo rose slowly, his face unreadable in the dim light. He reached for his knife, slipped it into its sheath, and said, almost to himself, "Then neither am I." The morning after the storm was a quiet no one trusted. Snow lay smooth and endless across the land, glinting like crushed glass beneath the pale sun. The world looked remade, innocent, as if it hadn't howled and torn itself apart the night before. Smoke curled from the cabin's chimney, thin, blue, fragile as breath. Inside, the air smelled of new life. Edith sat near the hearth, the baby sleeping in her arms. His tiny mouth moved against the blanket, his breath warm against her wrist. She had not slept since the birth, too full of wonder and disbelief. Every time she closed her eyes, fear whispered. That the child might stop breathing, that the world outside might come crashing through her door. But morning had come, and the world, for once, stayed still. Tejo moved quietly about the room, stirring the fire, mending the latch Boone had cracked open the night before. His movements were slow, deliberate, as if he feared disturbing the fragile peace that hung between them. When he turned, the light caught the side of his face, revealing the faint bruise along his jaw from where wind-whipped branches had struck him. She wanted to touch it, to thank him, to say something that could hold the weight of what he had done. But no word seemed worthy. He noticed her watching and smiled faintly. "He has your mouth," he said. She looked down at the child. "And his father's eyes." Tejo nodded. "Then both live again." For a long moment, there was only the crackle of fire. The baby stirred, and she hushed him gently, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I don't even know if I should name him," she whispered. "What kind of world waits outside for a boy like this?" "A hard one," Tejo said. "But not without light." She studied him, his calm face, his steady hands. He had become a constant presence in so little time, like the sound of the fire or the wind itself. A stranger still, yet one her heart had already learned to trust. By midday, the sky turned pale gold. The storm's edge had passed, revealing the road that wound toward town. She knew they would come, Boone and his men, drawn by curiosity or shame or both. She wanted to tell Tejo to hide, to run, but he only stood at the window, watching the horizon. "They'll come," she said softly. "I know. They'll say things. They already did." She rose, setting the baby in the cradle he'd carved from an old trough during the long night. "You shouldn't be here when they do." He looked at her with eyes like still water. "And leave you to them? I've faced worse." He shook his head. "Not with a child in your arms." The words silenced her. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post and called once, its voice stark against the quiet. Then came the sound she dreaded. Distant hooves, slow and certain. Tejo's hand went to the knife at his belt. Edith touched his arm. "No," she said. "No blood. Not today." He hesitated, then lowered his hand. His jaw tightened. "Then what do we do?" She looked toward the door. "We stand." The riders appeared through the haze of snow, 5 of them this time. Boone rode first, his black coat flaring like a shadow across the white. He dismounted, his boots crunching through the drifts, his breath fogging the air. The other men hung back, watching. He knocked once, hard enough to make the walls tremble. Edith opened the door before he could do it again. "Well," he said, looking her over. "Heard the storm didn't take you. Guess Sin's stubborn." She met his eyes without flinching. "The Lord left me standing. Maybe he has his reasons." Boone's gaze flicked past her to the cradle, then to the figure standing behind her. "I figured as much," he muttered. "Indians still here." Tejo stepped forward. He said nothing, only met the sheriff's stare with quiet defiance. Boone's hand twitched toward his gun. "You know what they'd call this?" he said. "A woman harboring a savage. That's enough to ruin you twice." "She's already ruined," one of the riders called. The others laughed, thin and cruel. Edith's voice cut through their noise. "Then let it be so." Boone blinked, thrown off balance. She took a step forward, her shawl slipping from one shoulder, the baby's cry soft behind her. "He saved my life," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and pride. "He saved my child's life. Not one of you came when the storm rose. Not one of you cared whether I froze or starved. So if he's a savage, then the savage is the only man among you." The words hung in the cold air like fire. Boone's face darkened. "You best watch your tongue, Edith." "I've done nothing but watch it," she replied. "And it never saved me." He reached for his gun, but before he could draw it, Tejo stepped in front of her. His chest was bare beneath his coat, skin marked by scars that glistened in the cold. He stood tall, silent, unafraid. The wind caught his hair, and for a breath, even Boone hesitated. The sheriff's hand dropped. The silence stretched so thin it could break. Then, without a word, Boone turned and spat into the snow. "You're not worth the rope," he muttered. He mounted his horse, signaling the others. One by one they followed, the sound of hooves fading down the white road. When they were gone, Edith let out a breath that trembled like glass. The world seemed impossibly still again, as if waiting to see what would happen next. Tejo turned to her. "They will not forget this." "Neither will I," she said. He looked toward the hills. "When the snow melts, I should leave. The child needs peace." She stepped closer, heart pounding. "And what about you?" He smiled faintly, eyes soft. "Peace finds me slower." Her lips parted to answer, but the baby began to cry. She turned, lifting him from the cradle, rocking him gently. When she looked back, Tejo was standing at the threshold, snow swirling around him. "Will you come back?" she asked. He didn't speak for a long time. Then, with that quiet certainty she had come to recognize, he said, "If spring finds you safe, I'll come." She nodded, unable to trust her voice. He touched the doorframe once, like a blessing, then stepped out into the white. The wind rose, carrying his figure into the glare of morning, until he was no more than a shadow moving against the endless snow. Inside, the baby quieted. The fire cracked softly. Edith stood by the window, watching the horizon where the world swallowed him. A single tear slid down her cheek, warm against the chill. Behind her, the townsfolk's laughter still echoed faintly in her mind, but for the first time it no longer pierced. The whispers had ended where courage began. She pressed her lips to her child's forehead and whispered, "You'll never grow up afraid." Outside, the snow began to melt in thin, bright rivulets, carving paths through the drifts. The world was changing. She could feel it in the air, the thaw, the quiet beginning. And somewhere beyond the ridge, a lone rider turned once to look back, the sun glinting on his knife before he disappeared into the rising light.